monthly.
This is Secular Founding Period History, and my name is Tony Messina. And welcome to another presentation of America's Lost History and Religious Tests 2. Religious Tests Part 2. America's Secular Origins in Constitutional Language, 1776 to 1788. Part 2, Letters and Writings by Tony Messina. Religious Tests Part 2. As I said in Part 1, seeing the words religious tests in the Constitution for the first time, I could only wonder who wrote these tests and what were some of the questions on the test, and I would think, what were the correct answers? I had no idea what the greater picture of it all would show, but the results of my research are noted and listed below for everyone's perusal. What follows is a collection of letters and writings regarding religious tests from people on both sides of the issue during the founding period. Historical origins of religious tests for public office in America. Letters, debates, and other writings regarding religious tests, be they pro or con. Religious tests. Benjamin Franklin to Richard Price, October 9, 1780. Landholders and farmers. Oliver Ellsworth, Connecticut Current, December 17, 1787. The Genuine Information. Luther Martin, Maryland Gazette, December 28, 1787. Samuel Parsons to William Cushing, Middletown, Connecticut, January 11, 1788. Religious Tests and Christian Belief, the Reverend Daniel Shute and Colonel William Jones, January 31, 1788. Isaac Backus on Religion and the State, February 4, 1788. William Williams to the American Mercury, Hartford, Connecticut, February 11, 1788. John Leland's Objections. Joseph Spencer to James Madison, Orange County, Virginia, February 28, 1788. Of the Middle Rank, Zachariah Johnson, June 25, 1788. Could not the Pope be president? Henry Abbott and James Iredell debate the ban on religious tests, July 30, 1788. Debate on religious toleration, Reverend David Caldwell and Samuel Spencer, July 30, 1788. Religious Tests. Benjamin Franklin to Richard Price. Dear Sir, Passy, October 9, 1780. Besides the pleasure of their company, I had the great satisfaction of hearing by your two valuable friends and learning from your letter that you enjoy a good state of health. May God continue it as well for the good of mankind as for your comfort. I thank you much for the second edition of your excellent pamphlet. I forwarded that you sent to Mr. Dana, he being in Holland. I wish also to see the piece you have written, as Mr. Jones tells me, on toleration. I do not expect that your new Parliament will be either wiser or honester than the last. All projects to procure an honest one by place bills and etc. appears to me vain and impracticable. The true cure, I imagine, is to be found only in rendering all places unprofitable, and the king too poor to give bribes and pensions. Till this is done, which can only be by a revolution, and I think you have not virtue enough left to procure one, your nation will always be plundered, and obliged to pay by taxes the plunderers for plundering and ruining. Liberty and virtue, therefore, join in the call. Come out of her, my people. I am fully of your opinion respecting religious tests, but though the people of Massachusetts have not in their new constitution kept quite clear of them, yet if we consider what the people were 100 years ago, we must allow they have gone great lengths in liberality of sentiment on religious subjects, and we may hope for greater degrees of perfection when their constitution, some years hence, shall be revised. If Christian preachers had continued to teach as Christ and his apostles did without salaries, and as the Quakers now do, I imagine tests would never have existed, for I think they were invented not so much to secure religion itself as the emoluments of it. When a religion is good, I conceive that it will support itself, and when it cannot support itself, and God does not take care to support it, so that its professors are obliged to call for the help of the civil power, it is a sign, I apprehend, of its being a bad one. But I shall be out of my depth if I wade any deeper in theology, and I will not trouble you with politics, not with news which are almost as uncertain, but conclude with a heartfelt wish to embrace you once more and enjoy your sweet society in peace among our honest, worthy, ingenious friends at the London. Adieu. A landholder, Oliver Ellsworth, Connecticut Current, December 17, 1787, to the landholders and farmers. I have often admired the spirit of candor, liberality, and justice with which the convention began and completed the important object of their mission. In all our deliberations on this subject, say they, we kept steadily in our view that which appears to us the greatest interest of every true American, the consolidation of our Union, in which is involved our posterity, felicity, safety, perhaps our national existence. This important consideration, seriously and deeply impressed on our minds, led each state in the convention to be less rigid on points of inferior magnitude than might otherwise have been expected, and thus the Constitution, which we now present, is a result of a spirit of amity and of that mutual deference and concession which the peculiarity of our political situation rendered indispensable. Let us, my fellow citizens, take up this Constitution with the same spirit of candor and liberality. Consider it in all its parts. Consider the important advantages which may be derived from it, and the fatal consequences which will probably follow from rejecting it. If any objections are made against it, let us obtain full information on the subject, and then weigh these objections in the balance of cool, impartial reason. Let us see if they be not wholly groundless, but if upon the whole they appear to have some weight, let us consider well whether they be so important that we ought on account of them to reject the whole Constitution. Perfection is not the lot of human institutions. That which has the most excellencies and fewest faults is the best that we can expect. Some very worthy persons, who have not had great advantages for information, have objected against that clause in the Constitution which provides that no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. They have been afraid that this clause is unfavorable to religion. But, my countrymen, the sole purpose and effect of it is to exclude persecution, and to secure to you the important right of religious liberty. We are almost the only people in the world who have a full enjoyment of this important right of human nature. In our country, every man has a right to worship God in that way which is most agreeable to his own conscience. If he be a good and peaceable citizen, he is liable to no penalties or incapacities on account of his religious sentiments, or, in other words, he is not subject to persecution. But in other parts of the world it has been and still is far different. Systems of religious error have been adopted in times of ignorance. It has been the interest of tyrannical kings, popes, and prelates to maintain these errors. When the clouds of ignorance began to vanish and the people grew more enlightened, there was no other way to keep them in error but to prohibit their altering their religious opinions by severe persecuting laws. In this way, persecution became general throughout Europe. It was the universal opinion that one religion must be established by laws, and that all who differed in their religious opinions must suffer the vengeance of persecution. In pursuance of this opinion, when popery was abolished in England and the Church of England was established in its stead, severe penalties were inflicted upon all who dissented from the established church. In the time of the Civil Wars, in the reign of Charles I, the Presbyterians got the upper hand and inflicted legal penalties upon all who differed from them in their sentiments respecting religious doctrines and discipline. When Charles II was restored, the Church of England was likewise restored, and the Presbyterians and other dissenters were laid under legal penalties and incapacities. It was in this reign that a religious test was established as a qualification for office. That is, a law made requiring all officers, civil and military, among other things, to receive the sacrament of the Lord's Supper according to the usages of the Church of England, written 6 months after their admission to office under the penalty of £500 and the disability to hold the office. And by another statute of the same reign, no person was capable of being elected to any office relating to the government of any city or corporation unless within a 12-month before he had received the sacrament according to the rites of the Church of England. The pretense for making these severe laws by which all but churchmen were made incapable of any office, civil or military, was to exclude the papists. But the real design was to exclude the Protestant dissenters. From this account of test laws there arises an unfavorable presumption against them. But if we consider the nature of them and the effects which they are calculated to produce, we shall find that they are useless, tyrannical, and peculiarly unfit for the people of this country. A religious test is an act to be done or profession to be made, relation to religion, such as partaking of the sacrament according to certain rites and forms, or declaring one's belief of certain doctrines, for the purpose of determining whether his religious opinions are such that he is admissible to a public office. A test in favor of any one denomination of Christians would be to the last degree absurd in the United States. If it were in favor of either Congregationalists, Presbyterians, Episcopalians, Baptists, or Quakers, it would incapacitate more than 3/4 of the American citizens for any public office, and thus degrade them from the rank of freemen. There needs no argument to prove that the majority of our citizens would never submit to this indignity. If any test act were to be made, perhaps the least exceptionable would be one requiring all persons appointed to office to declare at the time of their admission their belief in the being of a God and in the divine authority of the Scriptures. In favor of such a test, it may be said that one who believes these great truths will not be so likely to violate his obligations to his country as one who disbelieves them. We may have greater confidence in his integrity, but I answer, his making a declaration of such a belief is no security at all. For suppose him to be an unprincipled man, who disbelieves neither the word nor the being of a God, and to be governed merely by selfish motives, how easy is it for him to dissemble? How easy is it for him to make a public declaration of his belief in the creed which the law prescribes, and excuse himself by calling it a mere formality? This is the case with the test laws and creeds in England. The most abandoned characters partake of the sacrament, in order to qualify themselves for public employment. The clergy are obliged by law to administer the ordinance unto them, and thus prostitute the most sacred office of religion, for it is a civil right in the party to receive the sacrament in that country. Subscribing to the 39 Articles is a test for admission into holy orders, and it is a fact that many of the clergy do this when at the same time they totally disbelieve several of the doctrines contained in them. In short, test laws are utterly ineffectual. They are no security at all, because men of loose principles will by external compliance evade them. If they exclude any persons, it will be honest men of principle, who will rather suffer an injury than act contrary to the dictates of their conscience. If we mean to have those appointed to public offices who are sincere friends of religion, we the people who appoint them must take care to choose such characters, and not rely upon such cobweb barriers as test laws are. But to come to the true principle by which this question ought to be determined, the business of civil government is to protect the citizen in his rights, to defend the community from hostile powers, and to promote the general welfare. Civil government has no business to meddle with the private opinions of the people. If I demean myself as a good citizen, I am accountable not to man, but to God, for the religious opinions which I embrace, and the manner in which I worship the Supreme Being. If such had been the universal sentiments of mankind, and they had acted accordingly, persecution, the bane of truth and nurse of error, with her bloody axe and flaming hand, would never have turned so great a part of the world into a field of blood. But while I assert the right of religious liberty, I would not deny that the civil power has a right in some cases to interfere in matters of religion. It has a right to prohibit and punish gross immoralities and impieties, because the open practice of these is of evil example and public detriment. For this reason I heartily approve of our laws against drunkenness, profane swearing, blasphemy, and professed atheism. But in this state we have never thought it expedient to adopt a test law, yet I sincerely believe we have as great a proportion of religion and morality as they have in England, where every person who holds a public office must be either a saint by law or a hypocrite by practice. A test law is the parent of hypocrisy and the offspring of error and the spirit of persecution. Legislatures have no right to set up an inquisition and examine into the private opinions of men. Test laws are useless and ineffectual, unjust and tyrannical. Therefore the convention have done wisely in excluding this engine of persecution and providing that no religious test shall ever be required. The Genuine Information, Luther Martin, Maryland Gazette, Baltimore, December 28, 1787. Mr. Martin's information to the House of Assembly concluded. The part of the system which provides that no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States was adopted by a very great majority of the convention, and without much debate. However, there were some members so unfashionable as to think that a belief in the existence of a deity and of a state of future rewards and punishments would be some security for the good conduct of our rulers, and that in a Christian country it would be at least decent to hold out some distinction between the professors of Christianity and downright infidelity or paganism. Samuel Holden Parsons to William Cushing, Middletown, Connecticut, January 11, 1788. In the new Constitution, the want of power to establish religious tests is a grievance in the minds of some. In addition to the very many and conclusive arguments against religious tests, I am fully convinced of the expediency of inserting the exclusive clause, lest in future time by construction such right may be supposed to exist, and under the influence of the enthusiasm which has upheld men to the greatest absurdities, we may in future hang witches or establish such tests as would disgrace human nature. But what will become of the states who refuse their assent and are in the present confederation? I answer, we have all broken that covenant, and it is now prostrate in the dust, and no state can charge another with breaking these covenants, as they have by common consent dissolved it. I have to apologize for troubling you, but can any the least benefit be derived by new arguments or old ones placed in different lights? I have a consciousness you will pardon me. Religious Tests and Christian Belief, the Reverend Daniel Shute and Colonel William Jones, January 31, 1788. To establish a religious test as a qualification for offices in the proposed federal constitution appears to me, sir, would be attended with injurious consequences to some individuals and with no advantage to the whole. By the injurious consequences to individuals, I mean that some who in every other respect are qualified to fill some important post in government will be excluded by their not being able to stand the religious tests, which I take to be a privation of part of their civil rights. Nor is there to me any conceivable advantage, sir, that would result in the whole from such a test. Unprincipled and dishonest men will not hesitate to subscribe to anything that may open the way for their advancement and put them into a situation the better to execute their base and iniquitous designs. Honest men alone, therefore, however well qualified to serve the public, would be excluded by it, and their country be deprived of the benefit of their abilities. In this great and extensive empire there is and will be a great variety of sentiments in relation among its inhabitants. Upon the plan of a religious test, the question then must be, who shall be excluded from national trusts? Whatever answer bigotry may suggest, the dictates of candor and equity I conceive will be none. Far from limiting my charity and confidence to men of my own denomination in religion, I suppose and I believe, sir, that there are worthy characters among men of every other denomination among the Quakers, the Baptists, the Church of England, the Papists, and even among those who have no other guide in the way to virtue and heaven than the dictates of natural religion. I must therefore think, sir, that the proposed plan of government in this particular is wisely constructed, that as all have an equal claim to the blessings of the government under which they live, and which they support, so none should be excluded from them for being of any particular denomination of religion. The presumption is that the eyes of the people will be upon the faithful in the land, and from a regard to their own safety will choose for their rulers men of known abilities, of known probity, of good moral character. The Apostle Peter tells us that God is no respecter of persons, but in every nation he that feareth him and worketh righteousness is acceptable to him. And I know of no reason why men of such a character in a community, whatever denomination of religion, with other suitable qualifications, should not be acceptable to the people, and why they may not be employed by them with safety and advantage in the important offices of government. The exclusion of a religious test in the proposed Constitution, therefore, clearly appears to me, sir, to be in favor of its adoption. Colonel Jones, Bristol, thought that the rulers ought to believe in God or Christ, and that however a test may be prostituted in England, yet he thought if our public men were to be of those who had a good standing in the church, it would be happy for the United States, and that a person could not be a good man without being a good Christian. Isaac Backus on Religion and the State, February 4, 1788. Reverend Mr. Backus: Mr. President, I have said very little in this honorable convention, but I now beg leave to offer a few thoughts upon some points in the constitutions proposed to us, and I shall begin with the exclusion of any religious test. Many appear to be much concerned about it, but nothing is more evident both in reason and in Holy Scripture than that religion is ever a matter between God and individuals, and therefore no man or men can impose any religious test without invading the essential prerogatives of our Lord Jesus Christ. Ministers first assumed this power under the Christian name, and then Constantine approved of the practice when he adopted a profession of Christianity as an engine of state policy. And let the history of all nations be searched from that day to this, and it will appear that the imposing of religious tests had been the greatest engine of tyranny in the world. And I rejoice to see so many gentlemen who are now giving in the rights of conscience in this great and important matter. Some serious minds discover a concern lest, if all religious tests should be excluded, the Congress would hereafter establish popery or some other tyrannical way of worship. But it is most certain that no such way of worship can be established without any religious test. William Williams to the American Mercury, Hartford, Connecticut, February 11, 1788. Mr. Babcock, since the federal Constitution has had so calm, dispassionate, and rational a discussion, and so happy an issue in the late worthy convention of this state, I did not expect any member of that honorable body to be challenged in a newspaper, and especially by name and by anonymous writers on account of their opinion or decently expressing their sentiments relative to the great subject then under consideration, or any part of it. Nor do I see the propriety or happy issue of such a proceeding. However, as a gentleman in your paper feels uneasy that every sentiment contained in his publications, though in general they are well written, is not received with perfect acquiescence and submission, I will endeavor to satisfy him or the candid reader by the same channel that I am not so reprehensible as he supposes in the matter referred to. When the clause in the 6th article, which provides that no religious test should ever be required as a qualification to any office or trust, etc., came under consideration, I observe I should have chose that sentence, and anything related to a religious test had been totally omitted rather than stand as it did, but still more wishing something of the kind should have been inserted, but with a reverse sense, so far as to require an explicit acknowledgment of the being of a God, his perfections and his providence, and to have been prefixed to and stand as the first introductory words of the Constitution in the following or similar terms. Viz., we the people of the United States, in a firm belief of the being and perfections of the one living and true God, the Creator and Supreme Governor of the world, in his universal providence and the authority of his laws, that he will require of all moral agents an account of their conduct, that all rightful powers among men are ordained of and immediately derived from God. Therefore, in a dependence on his blessing and acknowledgment of his efficient protection in establishing our independence, whereby it is become necessary to agree upon and settle a constitution of federal government for ourselves, and in order to form a more perfect union, etc., as it is expressed in the present introduction, do ordain, etc., and instead of none, that no other religious test should ever be required, etc., and that supposing, but not granting, this would be no security at all, that it would make hypocrites, and etc. Yet this would not be a sufficient reason against it, as it would be a public declaration against and disapprobation of men who did not, even with sincerity, make such a profession, and they must be left to the searcher of hearts. That it would, however, be the voice of the great body of the people, and an acknowledgment proper and highly becoming them to express on this great and only occasion, and according to the course of providence, one mean of obtaining blessings from the Most High, but that since it was not, and so difficult and dubious to get it inserted, I would not wish to make it a capital objection, that I had no more idea of a religious test which should restrain offices to any particular sect, class, or denomination of men or Christians in the long list of diversity, than to regulate their bestowments by the stature or dress of the candidate. Nor did I believe one sensible Catholic man in the state wished for such a limitation, and that therefore the newspaper observations and reasonings, I named no author, against a test in favor of any one denomination of Christians, and the sacrilegious injunctions of the test laws of England, etc., combated objections which did not exist, and was building up a man of straw and knocking him down again. These are the same and only ideas and sentiments I endeavored to communicate on that subject, though perhaps not precisely in the same terms, as I had not written nor preconceived them, except the proposed test, and whether there is any reason in them or not, I submit to the public. I freely confess such a test and acknowledgment would have given me great additional satisfaction, and I conceive the arguments against it, on the score of hypocrisy, would apply with equal force against requiring an oath from any officer of the United or individual states, and with little abatement to any oath in any case whatever, but divine and human wisdom with universal experience have approved and established them as useful and a security to mankind. I thought it was my duty to make the observations in this behalf, which I did, and to bear my testimony for God, and that it was also my duty to say the Constitution, with this and some other faults of another kind, was yet too wise and too necessary to be rejected. P.S. I could not have suspected the landholder, if I knew him, to be the author of the piece referred to, but if he or any other is pleased to reply without the signature of his proper name, he will receive no further answer or notice from me. John Leland's Objections. Joseph Spencer to James Madison, Orange County, Virginia, February 28, 1788. What is dearest of all, religious liberty is not sufficiently secured. No religious test is required as a qualification to fill any office under the United States. But if a majority of Congress with the President favor one system more than another, they may oblige all others to pay to the support of their system as much as they please, and if oppression does not ensue, it will be owing to the mildness of administration and not to any constitutional defense. And if the manners of the people are so far corrupted that they cannot live by republican principles, it is very dangerous leaving religious liberty at their mercy. Of the middle rank, Zachariah Johnson, June 25, 1788. We are also told that religion is not secured, that religious tests are not required. You will find that the exclusion of tests will strongly tend to establish religious freedom. If tests were required, and if the Church of England or any other were established, I might be excluded from any office under the government because my conscience might not permit me to take the test required. The diversity of opinion and variety of sects in the United States have justly been reckoned a great security with respect to religious liberty. Could not the Pope be president? Henry Abbott and James Iredell debate the ban on religious tests, July 30, 1788. Mr. Henry Abbott, after a short exordium which was not distinctly heard, proceeded thus: Some are afraid, Mr. Chairman, that should the Constitution be received, they would be deprived of the privilege of worshiping God according to their consciences, which would be taking them from the benefit they enjoy under the present Constitution. They wish to know if their religious and civil liberties be secure under this system, or whether the general government may not make laws infringing their religious liberties. The worthy member from Eddington mentioned sundry political reasons why treaties should be the supreme law of the land. It is feared by some people that the power of making treaties, they might make a treaty engaging with foreign powers to adopt the Roman Catholic religion in the United States, which would prevent the people from worshiping God according to their own consciences. The worthy member from Halifax had in some measure satisfied my mind on this subject, but others may be dissatisfied. Many wish to know what religion shall be established. I believe a majority of the community are Presbyterians. I am for my part against any exclusive establishment, but if there were any, I would prefer the Episcopal. The exclusion of religious tests is by many thought dangerous and impolitic. They suppose that if there be no religious tests required, pagans, deists, and Mohammedans might obtain office among us, and that the Senate and representatives might all be pagans. Every person employed by the general and state governments is to take an oath to support the former. Some are desirous to know how and by whom they are to swear, since no religious tests are required, whether they are to swear to Jupiter, Juno, Minerva, Proserpine, or Pluto. We ought to be suspicious of our liberties. We have felt the effects of oppressive measures and know the happy consequences of being jealous of our rights. I would be glad some gentlemen would endeavor to obviate these objections in order to satisfy the religious part of the society. Could I be convinced that the objections were well-founded? I would then declare my opinion against the Constitution. Mr. Abbott added several other observations, but spoke too low to be heard. Mr. Iredell: Mr. Chairman, nothing is more desirable than to remove the scruples of any gentleman on this interesting subject. Those concerning religion are entitled to particular respect. I did not expect any objection to this particular regulation, which in my opinion is calculated to prevent evils of the most pernicious consequences to society. Every person in the least conversant in the history of mankind knows what dreadful mischiefs have been committed by religious persecutions. Under the color of religious tests, the utmost cruelties have been exercised. Those in power have generally considered all wisdom centered in themselves, that they alone had a right to dictate to the rest of mankind, and that all opposition to their tenets was profane and impious. The consequence of this intolerant spirit has been that each church has in turn set itself up against every other, and persecutions and wars of the most implacable and bloody nature have taken place in every part of the world. America has set an example to mankind to think more modestly and reasonably, that a man may be of different religious sentiments from our own without being a bad member of society. The principles of toleration, to the honor of this age, are doing away with those errors and prejudices which have so long prevailed even in the most intolerant countries. In the Roman Catholic countries, principles of moderation are adopted, which would have been spurned at a century ago. I should be sorry to find, when examples of toleration are set even by arbitrary governments, that this country, so impressed with the highest sense of liberty, should adopt principles on this subject that were narrow and illiberal. I consider the clause under consideration as one of the strongest proofs that could be adduced that it was the intention of those who formed this system to establish a general religious liberty in America. Were we to judge from the examples of religious tests in other countries, we should be persuaded that they do not answer the purpose for which they are intended. What is the consequences of such in England? In that country, no man can be a member in the House of Commons or hold any office under the Crown without taking the sacrament according to the rites of the Church. This, in the first instance, must degrade and profane a rite, which never ought to be taken but from a sincere principle of devotion. To a man of base principles, it is made a mere instrument of civil policy. The intention was to exclude all persons from offices but the members of the Church of England. Yet it is notorious that dissenters qualify themselves for offices in this manner, though they never conform to the Church on any other occasion, and men of no religion at all have no scruple to make use of this qualification. It never was known that a man who had no principles of religion hesitated to perform any rite when it was convenient for his private interest. No test can bind such a one. I am therefore clearly of opinion that such a discrimination would neither be effectual for its own purposes, nor, if it could, ought it by any means to be made. Upon the principles I have stated, I confess the restriction on the power of Congress in this particular has my hearty approbation. They certainly have no authority to interfere in the establishment of any religion whatsoever, and I am astonished that any gentleman should conceive they have. Is there any power given to Congress in matters of religion? Can they pass a single act to impair our religious liberties? If they could, it would be a just cause of alarm. If they could, sir, no man would have more horror against it than myself. Happily, no sect here is superior to another. As long as this is the case, we shall be free from those persecutions and distractions with which other countries have been torn. If any future Congress should pass an act concerning the religion of the country, it would be an act which they are not authorized to pass by the Constitution, and which the people would not obey. Everyone would ask, who authorized the government to pass such an act? It is not warranted by the Constitution, and is a barefaced usurpation. The power to make treaties can never be supposed to include a right to establish a foreign religion among ourselves, though it might authorize a toleration of others. But it is objected that the people of America may perhaps choose representatives who have no religion at all, and that pagans and Mohammedans may be admitted into offices. But how is it possible to exclude any set of men without taking away that principle of religious freedom which we ourselves so warmly contended for? This is the foundation on which persecution has been raised in every part of the world. The people in power were always in the right and everybody else wrong. If you admit the least difference, the door to persecution is opened, nor would it answer the purpose, for the worst part of the excluded sects would comply with the test, and the best men only be kept out of our councils. But it is never to be supposed that the people of America will trust their dearest rights to persons who have no religion at all, or a religion materially different from their own. It would be happy for mankind if religion was permitted to take its own course, and maintain itself by the excellence of its own doctrines. The divine author of our religion never wished for its support by worldly authority. Has he not said that the gates of hell shall not prevail against it? It made much greater progress for itself than when supported by the greatest authority upon earth. Had Congress undertaken to guarantee religious freedom, or any particular species of it, they would then have had a pretense to interfere in the subject they have nothing to do with. Each state, so far as the clause in question does not interfere, must be left to the operation of its own principles. There is a degree of jealousy which it is impossible to satisfy. Jealousy in a free government ought to be respected, but it may be carried to too great an extent. It is impracticable to guard against all possible danger of people's choosing their officers indiscreetly. If they have a right to choose, they may make a bad choice. I met by accident with a pamphlet this morning in which the author states as a very serious danger that the Pope of Rome might be elected president. I confess this never struck me before, and if the author had read all of the qualifications of a president, perhaps his fears might have been quieted. No man but a native and who has resided 14 years in America can be chosen president. I know not all the qualifications for a pope, but I believe he must be taken from the College of Cardinals, and probably there are many previous steps necessary before he arrives at this dignity. A native of America must have very singular good fortune, who, after residing 14 years in his country, should go to Europe, enter into Romish orders, obtain the promotion of cardinal, afterwards that of pope, and at length be so much in the confidence of his own country as to be elected president. It would be still more extraordinary if he should give up his popedom for our presidency. Sir, it is impossible to treat such idle fears with any degree of gravity. Why is it not objected that there is no provision in the Constitution against electing one of the kings of Europe president? It would be a clause equally rational and judicious. I hope that I have in some degree satisfied the doubts of the gentleman. This article is calculated to secure universal religious liberty by putting all sects on a level, the only way to prevent persecution. I thought nobody would have objected to this clause, which deserves, in my opinion, the highest approbation. This country has already had the honor of setting the example of civil freedom, and I trust it will likewise have an honor in teaching the rest of the world the way to religious freedom also. God grant both may be perpetuated to the end of time. Debate of Religious Toleration. Reverend David Caldwell and Samuel Spencer, July 30, 1788. Mr. Caldwell thought that some danger might arise. He imagined it might be objected to in a political as well as in a religious view. In the first place, he said there was an invitation for Jews and pagans of every kind to come among us. At some future period, said he, this might endanger the character of the United States. Moreover, even those who do not regard religion acknowledge that the Christian religion is best calculated of all religions to make good members of society on account of its morality. I think then, added he, that in a political view, those gentlemen who formed this Constitution should not have given this invitation to Jews and heathens. All those who have any religion are against the immigration of those people from the Eastern Hemisphere. Mr. Spencer was an advocate for securing every unalienable right, and that of worshiping God according to the dictates of conscience in particular. He therefore thought that no one particular religion should be established. Religious tests, said he, have been the foundation of persecutions in all countries. Persons who are conscientious will not take the oath required by religious tests, and will therefore be excluded from offices, though equally capable of discharging them as any member of the society. It is feared, continued he, that persons of bad principles, deists, atheists, and etc., may come into this country, and there is nothing to restrain them from being eligible to offices. He asked if it was reasonable to suppose that the people would choose men without regarding their characters. Mr. Spencer then continued thus, Gentlemen urge that the want of a test admits the most vicious characters to office. I desired to know what test could bind them. If they were of such principles, it would not keep them from enjoying those offices. On the other hand, it would exclude from offices conscientious and truly religious people, though equally capable as others. Conscientious persons would not take such an oath, and would be therefore excluded. This would be a great cause of objection to a religious test, but in this case, as there is not a religious test required, it leaves religion on the solid foundation of its own inherent validity, without any connection with temporal authority, and no kind of oppression can take place. I confess it strikes me so. I am sorry to differ from the worthy gentleman. I cannot object to this part of the Constitution. I wish every other part was as good and proper.
monthly. Louis is there. Man kan get mats en nog aan bestemmen. Stoos en ja, als het zo niet zeggen. Vaar, ik zie het met een mes, hoe wij